In the 1990s, radio wasn't just entertainment, it was authority. It decided which voices were amplified and which ones were quietly erased. And while some albums were celebrated, others were treated like threats, not because they were poorly made, not because they lacked fans, but because they questioned power, morality, and emotional comfort. These are the albums that made radio nervous. Before streaming, before social media, radio was the gatekeeper. Most listeners didn't choose music, it was chosen for them. And radio stations weren't just responding to taste, but to advertisers, parent groups, religious organizations, and political pressure. Anything that risked controversy could mean loss of funding or backlash. So when alternative music began pushing boundaries, politically, emotionally, and aesthetically, radio responded with fear. And fear often looks like censorship. Rage Against the Machine didn't hide their message behind metaphor. Their debut album was direct, confrontational, and intentionally uncomfortable. Songs like Killing in the Name didn't just criticize authority, they accused it. Radio stations reacted cautiously. Some refused to play the band entirely, others edited songs so aggressively that the meaning disappeared. This wasn't about profanity, it was about challenge. Rage reminded listeners that alternative music could still be revolutionary, not just expressive, but political. And radio, built to avoid conflict, wasn't ready for that. Although released in 1988, Straight Outta Compton became one of the most censored albums throughout the 1990s. Songs like The Police were banned outright. Radio stations avoided the album entirely. The FBI even sent a letter condemning the group's lyrics. But the album didn't promote violence, it documented reality. Radio wasn't rejecting criminal behavior, it was rejecting perspective. By refusing to air N.W.A., radio avoided confronting systemic issues that were uncomfortable, especially for mainstream audiences. And in doing so, it turned one of the most important albums in history into a symbol of censorship. By the mid-90s, Marilyn Manson had become a cultural lightning rod. Antichrist Superstar was intentionally provocative, musically, visually, and thematically. It challenged religion, authority, and conformity in ways that were designed to disturb. Radio stations reacted with distance. Many refused to play the album at all. Others limited airplay to late-night hours with heavy censorship. After major tragedies, Manson was blamed by politicians and media outlets, despite no evidence connecting his music to real-world violence. Radio didn't ban Antichrist Superstar because of what he said, but because of what it symbolized. The Downward Spiral explored mental health, addiction, self-destruction, and emotional collapse with brutal honesty. Songs like Closer were censored or banned due to sexual content. Other tracks were considered too disturbing for mainstream airplay. But the real issue wasn't lyrics, it was vulnerability. Radio struggled with music that didn't offer hope, clarity, or comfort. The Downward Spiral forced listeners to sit inside discomfort, and radio preferred not to. Melancholy was massive, but not entirely welcome. While some singles received airplay, many deeper cuts were quietly avoided due to themes of despair, alienation, and emotional heaviness. Following high-profile tragedies in the late 90s, several songs were pulled from rotation or discouraged. The album wasn't violent, but it was emotionally intense in a way radio considered risky. It showed that censorship didn't always come from outrage, sometimes it came from unease. OK Computer presented a different problem for radio. It wasn't offensive, it wasn't loud, it was cold, distant, and unsettling. Its themes, technological anxiety, isolation, paranoia, didn't fit radio's format-driven model. Songs were long, unconventional, and emotionally detached. While a few tracks received airplay, much of the album existed outside radio's comfort zone. Radiohead proved that alternative music didn't need hooks to be meaningful, and radio didn't quite know how to handle that. Pearl Jam's No Code represents the quietest form of censorship. There were no bans, no scandals. Instead, there was silence. The band avoided singles, resisted promotion, and continued their public fight against Ticketmaster and corporate control in music. Radio stations responded by pulling back support. No Code showed that refusing to cooperate with radio's system could be just as damaging as being banned outright. These albums weren't censored because they were dangerous. They were censored because they were honest, political, or emotionally confrontational. They challenged comfort, they challenged authority, They challenged the idea that music should be safe, and while radio tried to control what people heard, these albums survived, and in many cases became even more influential because of that resistance. If you enjoy deep dives into music history and the moments where art pushed back against control, consider subscribing to the Music Archive. And I want to ask you, which of these albums do you think radio was most wrong to censor, and why? Let me know in the comments.